Hello and welcome to the second part of chapter 3. Let's continue our discussion on the different kinds of culture or spheres of culture by talking about professional cultures. In today's world, there's a lot of focus on trying to create management as a profession and have it have a professional culture. In order to do so, employees need to be empowered. They're given greater autonomy and responsibility, and there's a greater reliance on their judgment. And thus employees have to know not just how to do something, but how to do it the right way and what is the right thing to do. Professionals acquire judgment through training, supervision, and socialization. Professional cultures by definition have codes of conduct, which might differ from profession to profession. Let's contrast how emotions are handled by lawyers versus doctors. Doctors may have to be more cautious and not too aggressive in how they handle patients, or what is called their bedside manner. Lawyers, however, aggressiveness, at least in court, is something that is encouraged. Law assumes adversarial relationships between conflicting parties, while in medicine, it's always a joint effort to defeat a common enemy, the disease. Even within the field of healthcare, different professions might have different rules for expression on emotion. Social workers more readily admit to feeling stressed, and they see this as a normal reaction. Doctors, however, on the other hand, see stress as a symptom of disease, and therefore they are less likely to admit to it or talk about it. Professions tend to differ in their values and beliefs. Consider, for example, if a pharmaceutical company were trying to develop a drug, and they put together a team that had a scientist, a doctor, and a lawyer. What would be the different ways in which the following would approach the development of the new drug? The scientists might be more excited about the abstract theory of developing the drug. They would be more concerned with having the opportunity to develop or test the drug. Doctors, on the other hand, are likely to be more concerned with patients' comfort and well-being, while the scientists test the drugs on the patient. Lawyers, on the other hand, would worry about compliance with government regulation, potential lawsuits, etc. This shows how varying professions value different things, and thus develop different professional cultures. This funny picture from your textbook shows some of the differences between different functional departments in an organization and the different cultures they might value. Different functions of finance, production, marketing, and R&D all seem to value different things. For example, while finance might believe that the R&D department should be subject to having a budget approved only based on their past track record performance, scientists in the R&D department might be more excited about the merit of the project itself and might not like the idea of being subject to being scrutinized over their past track record. In other words, they place more emphasis on creativity rather than reliability and future potential versus past results or reputation. Let's take a moment and examine this picture. It shows how different functional areas can approach the same problem from very different points of view. The first part shows what marketing wanted. Marketing specifications get changed by the R&D department depending on what R&D thinks is best. Further, the finance department has a reputation of being stingy and watching the purse strings, and thus the finance department budgets for very little of what is originally proposed by the marketing department. It further shows that the design department uses creative license in creating whatever design they think is appropriate, and production and manufacturing delivers a subpar product. Finally, the last image shows what the customer really wanted, and it seems that every department got it wrong. In other words, different stakeholders influence what is considered to be important and what is considered to be the best way to achieve success. The marketing function is more concerned with the customer, the R&D is more concerned with state-of-art technology, finance worries about return of investment or stock prices, etc. The most frequently discussed cultural sphere amongst all the different regional or subcultures that can exist is corporate culture, which is a culture of a particular organization. But why do companies have different cultures even when they exist in the same industry and sometimes even the same region? For example, Amazon and Facebook are both part of the tech industry, but they have very different corporate subcultures. The reason these two seemingly related tech companies, both existing in the West Coast in the United States, have such different corporate cultures from each other can be attributed to the influence of founding figures, its company history, stage of development, the nature of its market, etc. Jeff Bezos, for example, is very different from Mark Zuckerberg in terms of the things he values. Amazon is known as being a company that really watches its expenses. Facebook, on the other hand, splurges on its employees. Corporate culture changes as the company goes through different stages of development. As a company grows in size and scope, its systems start needing to be more structured and systematic. The company moves from being more entrepreneurial, being more managerial. At some stage, the company even might become bureaucratic because it starts focusing on the risks rather than creativity that initially launched the company. When the spheres of corporate culture and national culture interact, we might see interaction effects. Corporate culture, for example, can be reinterpreted in different countries depending on the country's culture. The same symbol can be locally redefined to have different meanings. The Marlboro Man, who's a lone cowboy in the US, is portrayed in Japan as sitting around a campfire at night with other cowboys, or as riding with other cowboys in Mexico. This is because being alone has very different meanings in the US versus Japan. In the US, being alone implies rugged individualism. In Japan, being alone means being left alone because you do not belong to the group. And thus how the Marlboro Man gets interpreted will change according to the culture of the country. Sometimes corporate culture and national culture can interact in a way to create a competitive advantage, as was the case when Disneyland entered Tokyo. The success of Tokyo Disneyland is attributed to the good fit between Japanese national culture and Disney's corporate culture. Both seem to value courtesy, efficiency, cleanliness, and performance, and thus Disneyland was a great fit in Tokyo. In fact, efforts to make Disneyland Tokyo more Japanese were rejected. People in Japan wanted an exact replica of the original Disneyland. They really wanted Japanese visitors to feel like they were taking part in a foreign vacation. The same Disney culture, however, created problems when France was chosen as a site for further international expansion. When Euro Disney, which is now known as Disneyland Paris, opened in April 1992, it faced much resentment from the local population and the media, which referred to it as a cultural Chernobyl. The picture shows Snow White getting arrested. These are actual images of people rioting in Disneyland Paris. This was because Disneyland tried to replicate the exact American model of Disneyland in Paris, including their human resource policy, such as what was appropriate to wear, what wasn't, tattoos, jewelry, hairstyles, etc. Europeans, especially French people, are fiercely independent and do not like being told what they can and cannot wear. They see this as impinging on their personal freedom of expression. And hence, when Disneyland Paris first opened up, it was a huge failure. It was known as the Tragic Kingdom instead of the Magic Kingdom. Unfortunately, because of its success in Tokyo, Disneyland had taken for granted that people across the world would accept the American version of Disneyland, and they did not think to change or adapt to the local culture when they expanded to Europe. This was a costly lesson for Disneyland. And thus, when Disneyland decided to go to Hong Kong in 2005, they made sure that they would try and adapt as much as possible to local context. Here we see Minnie Mouse dressed in Asian clothing. They also started offering Asian foods, and due to the Asian affinity to take pictures, they made sure that every part of the park was beautiful and picture-worthy. They also accounted for the Asian affinity to buy gifts by creating extra queues in the gift stores at Disneyland Hong Kong. With that, we come to an end of Chapter 3. Please don't forget to answer the discussion question posted for Chapter 3 on D2L. Thank you.